New York City, 3. Unfinished. Piet Mondrian.
Take a moment to ask yourself what lies within this painting. The lines, the colours, the order. Observe the lines. Notice that they are actually tape. Which parts are made of paint? The clear preparation of the canvas, the yellow in the upper left section, and the blue on the right edge. Piet Mondrian used an abstract language to make reference to something that does exist, New York. Where might we be viewing the city from, if the result is this image? From above. This viewpoint recalls the map, another type of flat, abstract representation. Depth disappears, and no one point is more important than any other. There is simply a succession of precise geometric references that could very well continue beyond the edges of the painting.
Like many artists and intellectuals from his time, Mondrian arrived in the United States as he fled from the Second World War. He was impacted by the dynamism of the big city, its ordered urbanism, its tall buildings and jazz rhythms, which he had already discovered in Paris. All of these elements brought about changes in his art. It lost the rigidity of the earlier Neoplasticism movement and acquired a greater freedom and dynamism.
Neoplasticism was a search for a new art form that would fit a new society, based on universal harmony. The experience of war had revealed a lack of social equilibrium, and as a result, artists turned to nature to look for a set of universal laws that would serve their ideas. They found that within the apparent variety of the natural world, there are certain universal norms that create order within great diversity. Neoplastic artists made an effort to find those same patterns in their art. What is the most permanent, precise and universal element in art? The straight line, the two-dimensional nature of the piece, primary colours, black, white, geometric shapes.
As a result, a universal reality is built, thanks to this essential language, which enables the spectator to appropriate the work at any time, in any space.
The presence of the tape allows us to observe the artist's technique during this period. Their impermanent nature meant that he could play with compositional organization over long periods of time. He moved the tape around until he found an appropriate balance. The final phase consisted of substituting the tape with color in paint. As such, this piece is still in the process of being created. We will never know if Mondrian was able to achieve the compositional balance he worked so hard to find.
Harlequin with a Mirror, Pablo Picasso.
Following the cataclysm of war, the avant-garde movements are characterized by what has been called a return to order. This tendency is defined by a search for certain established values in art, which are sought out and found in tradition.
In Picasso's case, the return to order began with a trip to Italy in 1917. He was inspired to reinterpret the periods of classical antiquity and the Renaissance. His experience with Cubism was not unrelated to this rethinking.
Harlequin with a Mirror belongs to this period, which saw a return to themes related to the circus, street artists and figures from the Commedia dell'arte, figures which had long attracted the artist's interest. In the case of this Harlequin, the figure encompasses a mixture of Pierrot's melancholic face, an acrobat's suit and Harlequin's hat, with special significance given to the latter character. Picasso considered him to have a temperament which was similar to his own. On various occasions throughout his career, he painted portraits of himself as Harlequin, turning this character into the bearer of his personal concerns.
The theme intersects with several influences of the day, from the frescoes of Pompeii to Venus admiring herself in a mirror. Here the goddess is substituted by a young Harlequin, who serves as a pretext, allowing the artist to speak of love and beauty.
Who is this young man who regards himself absently in the mirror? Is Picasso himself hidden once again in Harlequin's costume? A study of the painting using X-radiography reveals that Picasso began the piece as a self-portrait, but in the final result the figure's face has a much more impersonal look. In addition, the figure's youth is not in keeping with Picasso's own, as he was 42 years old at the time.
Harlequin gazes at himself in the mirror, perhaps in a reflection on the passing of time, or the loss of youth and beauty with which he is traditionally associated. These thoughts may seem to point to the melancholic state so characteristic of Piero, but instead, the melancholy seems to be the result of an unhappy love affair. Picasso was no stranger to the subject of love. Some experts have identified in his work a relationship with the frustrated love affair the artist had around this time with the American Sarah Murphy. Portrait of George Dyer in a Mirror, Francis Bacon.
In the early 1960s, Bacon commissioned the photographer John Deakin, asking him to take photos of the people in his inner circle. One of the men in this group was George Dyer, the painter's lover at the time. Photos help me. They're a kind of support, a reminder, and they call up images. Photography allows me to get started. Later, I can erase, scratch out, make things disappear. In the end, there's not much left of the original photo. In fact, it frees me up from having to be exact.
With these words, Bacon is implying that portraits can address other aspects that do not run parallel to reality, given that in order to do so, the art of photography is more appropriate. Thus, Bacon transforms the photo of George Dyer into a broken image, one that is torn into two pieces that are reordered in a way that lies outside visual logic. The fact that the subject is seated on a revolving chair may also suggest the idea of movement, allowing us to see Dyer from 2 points of view.
What does it tell us about Dyer that he has been subjected to this violent distortion? What are Bacon's portraits really about then? In order to answer these questions, let's take a look at the space. It is empty, cylindrical, inhospitable, and bathed in a cold light. A mirrored piece of furniture reflects back to us another face that is split down the centre. The skin is red, as though flayed.
The British painter lifts up the skin in order to show us what lies beneath Dyer's surface, but also, as this portrait lacks a certain individuality, beneath the surface of any person. Dyer was a former criminal, drug addict, and alcoholic, who ended up killing himself. When Bacon converts him into a figure wrapped up in a destructive spiral in a bleak space, the artist is also expressing the grim fate of modern man, one that is meaningless and sordid.
I do not distort for the sake of distortion. They are not subject to torture. I try things. I try to transmit the reality of the image in its most heartbreaking moment, but I am not always successful.
Woman in Bath, Roy Lichtenstein. A woman looks at us as she bathes. The only clues we have as to her location are several tiles in the background and the shadow that is cast on them.
Women bathing is a traditional theme in painting, often featuring scenes with goddesses and nymphs. The use of a figure who looks out at the spectator is an age-old tool in the history of art. It is worth asking ourselves, then, what exactly is modern about this piece?
If we look at the work up close, we can see that it is painted using a series of dots. Together with the simple graphic style of the figure, these elements resemble a comic strip. The figure is also in keeping with the canon of feminine beauty used in advertising since the late 1940s, and used in close connection with models coming out of another form of mass media, the cinema. Doesn't this woman bring to mind Marilyn Monroe?
In this project, Lichtenstein explores some of the characteristic concerns of pop artists. On the one hand, they were rebelling against the textures and pictorial gestures of the abstract expressionists, while on the other, they wanted to explore the complex connections between art and popular culture.
Images of low culture, like the comic strips that were copied and sold by the thousands, or the stills from conventional movies, did not claim to be works of art. Their natural link to mechanized reproduction prevented any comparison to unique paintings, and they were entirely devoid of that aura. Lichtenstein questions these categories as he chooses images from those contexts and turns them into art. But how does he do it?
The figure is shown on a scale that is much greater than the original and is disconnected from the narration. Furthermore, it is created by the artist himself, standing in clear contrast to the mechanized reproduction typical of the images found in our consumer society.
Lichtenstein questions conventional artistic criteria when he manages to transform appearances. His work turns ordinary pictures into works of art.